Welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. I'm Mark Regev, and I'm here with my co-host, Ruthie Blum. How are you today, Ruthie?
Hi, Mark. As Mark says, welcome to Israel Undiplomatic. I'd like to request of our viewers to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Now, let's get started, Mark. I'd like to first raise the issue of Donald Trump's threat to Hamas about the hostages.
So I think it's correct. Maybe I should ask you to actually read out exactly what he said, and then
I will.
Those of our viewers and listeners who are not up on the weeds of this, you will read out exactly, please, what the president-elect said.
I will, though I have to say this thing went so viral.
Yeah.
I'll bet everybody's read it, but just it's worth repeating. This is what he wrote first on Truth Social, his social media platform, and then, of course, it went all over everywhere. This is what he wrote. Everybody is talking about the hostages who are being held so violently, inhumanely, and against the will of the entire world in the Middle East. But it's all talk and no action. Please let this truth serve to represent that if the hostages are not released prior to January 20th, 2025, the date that I proudly assume office as President of the United States, there will be all hell to pay, all capital letters, in the Middle East. And for those in charge who perpetrated these atrocities against humanity, those responsible will be hit harder than anybody has been hit in the long and storied history of the United States of America. Release the hostages now.
Okay.
Pretty impressive, wouldn't you say?
So I would ask you, Ruthie, you don't really expect him to send the Marines in or the Delta Force. What do you think that means?
Let me ask you a question. Is what he ends up doing the thing on everybody's mind right now? Yes, some people are discussing, what does he mean? Is he going to send in the Marines? No, I don't think that that's what anybody believes. What we do know is that he took the reins. Unlike the Biden administration, President Biden, for 14 months, has said, okay, let's negotiate. Okay, let's negotiate a ceasefire. Okay, bring the hostages home. In other words, bring them, Israel, bring them home. Meaning, Prime Minister Netanyahu, they're in your basement, release them. In comes Trump, and he says, no, we are the greatest superpower in the world, or we used to be and should be again. We are the leaders of the free world, not leaders from behind. And I'm telling you guys, also there are American hostages, but aside from that, no, this is unacceptable. And you think you little despotic terrorist, bloodthirsty perpetrators of the October 7th massacre who are raping and beheading, who raped, beheaded, etc., and are continuing to commit atrocities in the tunnels of Gaza. You think that I'm going to tolerate this? No. You better deliver. And that message is as important as anything right now because, he's warning them, my time is coming soon. And don't test me.
So I first of all think it's very important what he said. And I think it could actually help us get a deal to get the hostages released before January 20th. We know that many people around the world and many people in the United States think there's a screw missing with Donald Trump, that he's not your regular politician. Some people think he's crazy. They think he's mad. And though that may worry some Americans because he's their president, not those who voted for him, obviously, but the truth is America's enemies, who tend to be Israel's enemies too, that's good for us. That's good for the free world. Why? Because, as I said on a previous podcast, if you have all this military equipment, all these missiles, all these tanks, all these special forces, submarines, everything that the U.S. has in its military, but people think you're never going to use them, right? They're not worth as much. But if people think, you are someone who is capable of using these things, that you have no qualms about using American power when it is necessary, That's an important message. And when you talk about groups like Hamas or Hezbollah or the Iranian leadership in Tehran, I mean, you can talk about international law and what is right until tomorrow, but it doesn't help. Ultimately, these groups understand only one thing, and that is force and power. And I think Trump's comments, together with other factors, do give us today a moment of opportunity to see the hostages released. There's the Trump threat, and it's clearly a threat to the Hamas and its organization. I'm not sure it's a threat. I mean, it's vague, yes, it's opaque. But if I understand the Trump worldview, it's not so much necessarily that America would do something very strong and send in its military, but maybe giving Israel a green light to do things that we haven't done before, which from our point of view is not a bad thing. So it's the Trump factor that could help us get the hostages out, but it's also the fact that Hezbollah has been defeated in this war in Lebanon, that Hezbollah that said they would never agree to the separation of the two fronts, the Gaza front from the Lebanese front, they agreed to that separation. And they are now not signed, but they've agreed to a ceasefire with Israel, which we'll discuss later how that's going. And so Hamas feels isolated, Hamas feels threatened. Hamas sees its so-called allies, pulling back away from it. It really is standing alone in Gaza. It sees the people of Gaza, though it rules with an iron fist, of course, but the people of Gaza saying, why are you continuing this war? It's only bringing more death and destruction upon us. So is there a constellation that could bring about the release of hostages with, once again, the Trump words being part of that? I think there is. It doesn't mean it's necessarily going to happen because we know who we're dealing with. But I think if I was a betting man, I would say the odds of a hostage release have gone up.
And they've especially gone up because of what Trump said. And you're right. I highly doubt that he'll send any forces to the Middle East. I mean, Americans partly voted for Donald Trump because they do not want boots on the ground in the Middle East. We know that. And Israel doesn't expect that. What we finally want is not to have our hands tied the way the Democrats did for the entire 14 months so far of this war. One thing, and Trump has said so, and every one of his nominees or appointees, I mean, they haven't been confirmed yet, but, for various jobs, FBI, CIA, name it, Department of Justice, every single one of them in an interview has said, Israel is our closest ally. Basically, has said, Israel, the good guys. We know who the bad guys are. The Iranian axis are the bad guys. And Israel can do what it wants. We're not going to withhold a single weapon. And we're not going to sanction Israel. We're not going to criticize Israel for doing what it has to do. That's a huge difference. As I said, it's not that Trump is suddenly going to come in and do something. But here's why it's also very, very important. You said people think he's crazy. Well, the truth is he's eccentric for sure, but because we now know how he was when he was president the first time, we know that his policies were far from crazy. They were extremely sane. They were surprising because they were so people, many, even Republicans and Democrats and Jews said, oh no, Trump is an isolationist and all. He came into office and he implemented one policy after the other that was good for Israel and bad for Israel's enemies and for America's enemies. And when he says he's going to go in, he's going to reimpose sanctions on Iran, etc. So the enemies are afraid of him. They think he's crazy, although maybe even they now know that it's not that he's crazy. It's that when he vows to do something, he does it. And that enough, these guys have been used to the last 4 years. The world, look what's happened. Trump said, look at it, I'm not in power. And all of a sudden, there's wars all over the world. Well, what that means is, I know that Trump tends to hyperbole. And, he says, never before, and I'm the best, and all of this. That's irrelevant. The fact is that wars did erupt all over the place. And one reason was because all the world has to do is smell American weakness, and boom. Now, so again, now the trouble, I just want to make one last point and then I'll hand the floor to you. And that is, it's interesting how you said there's a better chance for a deal to release the hostages. And, I personally find it upsetting. It's possible that we'll have no choice and all that. I just think that one of the biggest problems of the Western mindset is that we're winning and we say, okay, we'll make a deal. We allow our enemies to dictate deals to us. And the same thing, and this is why you can now talk about Lebanon. We allowed Hezbollah and the Biden administration and the Lebanese government, quote unquote, and France and UNIFIL, we allowed all of those bad actors to dictate to us just as we were pulverizing Hezbollah.
So I want to say in my own defense, Ruthie, when I say a deal, I mean a deal on Israel's terms, a deal that Israel can live with. And we could have had a deal with Hamas 6 months ago had we totally capitulated, probably, and agreed to any, that Hamas stay in power in Gaza and they can build new missiles and they can plan another October 7th.
And not return the hostages. Even in those deals, they didn't say, we'll return all the hostages.
No. Correct. And so all I'm saying now is, like I believe, and we'll discuss it in a moment, in Lebanon, we got a deal that was good for Israel. I hope we're reaching a constellation now because of Trump, because of Hezbollah turning its back on Hamas, because of the changing strategic situation in the area, because of all those reasons, maybe we can get a deal that gets the hostages out, which can be on terms that Israel can live with. And that's all I'm saying. When I say deal, I'm talking about a deal that's good for us. You said there's something that's very interesting. You said that when Trump says something, people know that he can mean it. And I remember that very clearly on the Jerusalem issue, because I think every presidential candidate over the last 40 years, right, was saying, well, if I'm elected president, I'll move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. I know that Clinton said it, and I know that George W. Bush said it, and I know, right, it was said by almost every candidate, except for Obama never said it, yeah. Trump was the first one who said it and did it. And I think that's an important message. Last point I want to raise before we move on to another subject. I remember after Trump was elected, I was seeing on social media and stuff, they said, okay, nothing now is going to happen until January 20th, because if there's a ceasefire in Lebanon, he'll want the credit, so it can only happen. It's like the hostages were only released, the Iranian hostages that were held, the American hostages that were held in Tehran in the U.S. embassy. It was only on the transfer of power, the day of the transfer of power, that they were released. And so nothing will happen, because why would anyone make a deal with an outgoing president when they can get the points from making with a new president? And what Trump has done and shown is that actually when he says he wants this finished, this over by 20th of January, he also means that too. And it's actually interesting. I watch, obviously, I'm no longer a government official, but I watch very closely the reports. But having been a former government official, I maybe it gives me a certain understanding. Every time, let's say, Ron Dermer, the Minister for Strategic Affairs, goes to Washington. He went to Washington like a week before the Lebanon deal, and it was obviously that he was finalizing the aspects of that deal. He met the Biden administration, but he also met the Trump team, and he's coordinated with both. And I think the message of the Trump team is clear to the Biden administration. Don't save anything for us. If you can get things done in the next, couple of weeks before January 20th, we're fine with that. And I think we really do have in the next couple of weeks, we've got the Lebanon deal. We'll discuss that in a moment. But we've also, I think, once again, I know it's not for sure. I know we're dealing with a vicious, anti-Semitic, terrorist enemy. I have no illusions about them. But once again, I choose my words carefully. I think the chances of getting a deal that's good for Israel have gone up. How much remains to be seen.
Okay, I'll buy that. I'll tell you, it's funny because months ago, throughout the war, I've changed a lot in my knee-jerk opposition to many of our policies. I have felt all along, each time we're capitulating. I don't know, we're not asserting our power. And I blamed Biden for it, and he deserves the blame, by the way, because, Israel needs the United States. And so we can't just antagonize Biden, et cetera, and Blinken, and Amos Hochstein, Mr. Frequent Flyer. But I have been critical all along until I say, whoa, Netanyahu had something up his sleeve that was not immediately apparent. And, we can give many examples, like the beepers going off all over and wounding so many Hezbollah terrorists, the taking out of the entire Hezbollah leadership, killing Hamas leadership. I mean, all of those things were under wraps until they emerged. And right before I said, uh-oh, this is terrible, it's terrible, it's terrible. The same thing when this Lebanon deal, if you read it, and also understanding the players involved, as I said, UNIFIL is in cahoots with Hezbollah. Hezbollah has infiltrated the Lebanese army, and Lebanon is not really a state. And France has become such an enemy of Israel. So all the people there supposedly monitoring and dictating terms of this deal are bad guys as far as I'm concerned. Now, so I didn't like this deal. However, I said, you know what? Give it a chance. Because what we really have to put to the test, as Netanyahu pointed out, the test is not what's on that piece of paper. Between you and me, he didn't say this. I'm saying this, that it's not worth the ink that's on it. However, what matters is, can we get Israelis to move back to their homes in the north? And what does that require? That there is no danger. It's not just missiles, not just rockets. I think a lot of people don't get this. Infiltration, like on October 7th in the south. I think people who live in the north are afraid, rightfully so. There was a whole network of tunnels going on there, and they know what they heard. They heard it clanging and building. And now Netanyahu said, okay, but give us a chance to show you that any violation will be met with a strong blow. And so far we're seeing that. Of course, we're also seeing that Hezbollah violated the agreement right away. And again, we are counting down the days until January 20th. That's not just Israel. It's the whole world. It's just that Israel, I believe, is counting down with bated breath, excitedly, to finally untie our chains with all of these bad actors. And when I say bad actors, and I know you're going to disagree with me, I think, when I say France and UNIFIL, France has behaved abominably towards Israel throughout this whole thing. And it only, it's just Macron, I have no sympathy for him whatsoever, and he's proven himself to be an enemy. So not an enemy like Hezbollah and Iran, right? He's not going around killing people. But he is on the wrong side of this. And I look at that and I say, this is a deal with whom? And so, yes, I'm giving it a chance, because in the past, when I said this is bad, 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 I realized I had been wrong. And that's because I'm not privy to what's actually going on behind the scenes.
So I want to take issue when you say Macron is an enemy, France is an enemy. I couldn't disagree more strongly. I have had problems with French policy. The fact that the Israeli companies, defense companies couldn't be at the recent Paris Air Show and things like this, I think it's disgusting, yes. But I think one should be more precise in their language. France is not an enemy. Iran is an enemy. Hezbollah is an enemy. Hamas is an enemy. France is not an enemy. France is one of these group of European countries who are wrong about many of the policy issues. They're not standing behind Israel in a way that I'd like to see them standing behind Israel. But I think to use the word enemy is simply not correct. You could have a discussion like, has Russia and China since the beginning of this war, have they been acting like enemies? I think that's a serious discussion. But France, no, they're in a different place. And they did help us get this deal in Lebanon. And no. Let's be clear.
Okay.
It was Israeli military power that got this deal in Lebanon.
And
the sacrifice of the Israelis. But ultimately, you needed some sort of international auspices. The Americans were the major players, but the French also provided some of that auspices. And once again, I share many of your criticisms of French behavior, their diplomacy, their foreign policy. But I think the word enemy it's like, everyone who doesn't like us, we call, some people will say they're Nazis, right? No, they're not. They're just, they're other things. Not all anti-Semites are Nazis, right? Nazis are a specific form of extreme anti-Semitism. And just as so I can not like aspects of French diplomatic behavior without saying they're my enemy. I think that's factually incorrect. But I want to raise another issue that you raised, which is about the infiltration. And the threat that Hezbollah posed before October 6th of this sort of, crossing the border and doing an invasion and a massacre of our people. And it was a very real possibility, unfortunately. I, as you know, teach at Reichman University International Relations, and I took, at the beginning of 23, before obviously the war broke out, I took my master's students up to the northern border, and we got the IDF team there to show us one of these tunnels that Hezbollah had built across the frontier, under the frontier, I should say. And we could actually go in there, and the students go down and look at this Hezbollah terror tunnel. Now, once again, the Hezbollah, they didn't build the tunnel for, to have trade and communication with us. They built the tunnel to come into Israel and to kill our people.
And kidnap.
And kidnap and kill our people, correct. And what we've done through our military operation in South Lebanon in the border area, and we paid for it. Too many Israeli soldiers, unfortunately, gave their lives for that. But what we did is we cleaned out that area in the south, and the diplomatic agreement reached, the deal, you don't like the word, but the deal reached, says that they can't come back. Hezbollah can't come back to that area of the south. And we will enforce that. And in the 2 weeks now since the deal was signed, we have been enforcing that. If Hezbollah sort of does something that's not in accordance with the understandings reached, we attack. And I think hopefully, not immediately, but over time, that will be the confidence of the civilian population of northern Israel to return to their homes. That's one of our war aims. And if we can do that, that's victory.
Okay, so I have two things to say about France. Okay, you don't like the word enemy. I don't think it's the same as calling someone a Nazi. Okay, I think enemy is a strong word, and I meant it in this case because of its voting record, because of its accusations. And I'll tell you something. Macron said that he would honor the arrest warrants for Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, the International Criminal Court arrest warrants. So if, for example, Netanyahu were to land in Paris at the airport, he would be arrested. Well, as soon as France wanted to take part in this deal in Lebanon, it was made clear to him, this is what you say, you're going to arrest us, and now you want to be part of our monitoring committee? So he said, well, no, I'll soften that. What I'll say is, no, I'll leave it to our courts to determine. It won't be an automatic arrest. And that was a manipulation to enable France to be part of this. Now, why is that bad? It's bad because France is against us in this war. France believes that we are committing crimes, and as a matter of fact, as soon as we started dealing with the violations, France accused us of making 52 violations. Israel, not Hezbollah, okay? And that's one thing. The second thing you pointed out was, according to this deal, Hezbollah cannot move down below the Litani River. In other words, along the border with Israel. But here's why that's baloney. It's baloney because all the villages there, that most of which are destroyed, but if they're being as part of the deal, the villagers can come back and rebuild. Why is that bad? That village was already rife with Hezbollah fighters, number one. Number two, as I said, the Lebanese army has Hezbollah sits in the Lebanese parliament. What you have, if you allow anybody to live in those villages, it's going to be Hezbollah. No question about it. So what do we now? On the other hand, the good news is, again, back to Trump, I heard from one of Israel's journalists who had leaks. Now, we don't know if he's correct or not, but according to somebody who leaked this to him, Trump made clear to Netanyahu that he will allow Israel to keep that Lebanese area along the border in Lebanon, in southern Lebanon, empty. In other words, demilitarized, like a no man's land. That was not a part of the deal, and Trump is going to allow it. Apparently, now we don't know if that's true. I'm telling you what, gossip, rumor. If that's true, excellent, because we can't let any Lebanese move down there because they're tainted. They have weapons all over the place. Hezbollah took over Lebanon.
So I would respond in the following way. I'm not sure that you can stay in a situation where the southern part of Lebanon is depopulated totally. And I agree with you that many of the people who live there have historic relationships with Hezbollah. It's clear we saw all these weapons and so forth in these so-called civilian homes and so forth across the south, yes? But I think the most important thing is that Hezbollah cannot have any military assets south of the Litani. So if someone comes back and he likes Hezbollah and he might vote for Hezbollah in national elections in Lebanon, all right, I don't like it. But we have the ability. I mean, if someone has got a pistol or a Kalashnikov or something like that, we can prevent rockets, we can prevent missiles, we can prevent serious arms, we can prevent them digging tunnels, we can prevent them digging fortifications, all according to the agreement. And as we say on Seder night for our non-Jewish viewers, the Passover Seder, we say Dayenu, it's enough. It's enough. I said last week when we were debating the agreement, you don't let the possible stand in the way of the perfect, right? And I think it can work, especially if there's an understanding and our enemies understand that Israel, if they do break their understandings, that Israel will have a green light from Washington to do what needs to be done. That's also a very, very strong strategic asset. And it doesn't matter if the story that you've heard through the journalist is correct or incorrect. The fact that the other side might believe it's correct is worth a lot for Israel.
Correct. Well, we have to talk about Iran here because again,
can we do Syria there first? Can we do
well,
Syria?
no. This is leading to Syria. Yes, Iran is relevant. Right now, Iran is trying to keep the Assad regime in power, along with Russia. They're trying to keep the Assad regime in power, and the rebel groups are trying to topple Assad. And what you have, as I keep saying to everybody, you have the Boston Strangler fighting Jack the Ripper, and we've got to decide which evil forces we can tolerate. But here's why I wanted to bring this to Iran. You're talking about Hezbollah. If Donald Trump keeps his promise and imposes huge economic sanctions on Iran again, no more nice guy again, not like the Biden administration that
maximum pressure.
And forges, again, goes back to forging, in expanding the Abraham Accords with Saudi Arabia, etc. Punishing Iran. Iran won't have money for its weapons, and it certainly won't have money to fund Hezbollah. And meanwhile, in Syria, one of the ways that weapons get to Hezbollah in Lebanon is through Syria. And now if, again, you have forces preventing that, but mainly if you have Iran weakened and somehow paralyzed, that will make the biggest difference of all here. Not that, by the way, the point is, okay, the Assad regime is no friend of ours, and all of the rebel groups, you're talking about ISIS-affiliated group, you are talking about bad guys from here to there. And Turkey, of course, another one. And don't tell me you don't agree with me that Turkey is our enemy. Please do not say that. But in any case, what we have here is a situation that means that we have to pray that Iran is decapitated. Perhaps regime change would be great, but that has to come from within. I'm just saying, if you take away their money, and we have to take away all the money, the humanitarian aid that goes to Hamas, it isn't going to the civilians. Again, we have, and the only hope we have now is to have Donald Trump not in an illusion about what peace means and with whom.
So in all of international relations, in all politics, you have the law of unintended consequences.
Yeah.
And you do something financial and you thought you were helping people, and there are unintended consequences and you're actually hurting them. Yes, that happens in real life. The law of unintended consequences. So Israel fought against Hezbollah because they're our enemy, and they posed a threat, and we had to eliminate the threat on our border. The law of unintended consequences was that got the rebels in Syria excited that Hezbollah had been a crucial element in keeping Assad in power. It was their boots, Hezbollah boots on the ground, that enabled, together with others, yes, but enabled basically Assad to stay in power. They saw Hezbollah weakened badly by the IDF. Not that they love us. As you said, a lot of them are ISIS-affiliated, Hamas supporters.
They all hate us.
Yeah.
Forget that.
But they saw Hezbollah weakened by the Israelis. They saw Russia involved in the Ukraine. and distracted, and they thought this is their chance. And so far, they've taken over the second largest city in Syria, which is Aleppo. And now they're running towards Homs, which is, and who knows what will happen on the battlefield. But there's no doubt that one of the unintended consequences of Israel's victory over Hezbollah in Lebanon has been this explosion of the civil war in Syria, which was sort of dormant, but it started 12 years ago, 14 years ago, and it's been going ever since. Now, Israel, as you say, on both sides of the civil war are actors who are very problematic for us. The Assad regime, with Hezbollah and Iran, terrible alliance, very bad for Israel. But the other side once again, is not our cup of tea either. And so the fact that they're fighting each other is probably not bad for Israel. Instability and chaos in Syria, that has certain challenges for Israel. Assad has all these terrible weapon systems, and if they fell into the hands of some of these ISIS-type groups, maybe that's not good either. I don't know how this is going to develop. I don't think Israel should necessarily take a side, but I'll give you something to think about. And I say this totally irresponsibly, but I'm sharing with you my thinking. The Assad regime stayed in power because of support from Iran and Russia. And Israel, despite all the crisis in Moscow-Jerusalem relations, Israel has kept channels of communication with Moscow open. We're obviously not friends. Russians have totally been very hostile towards us. But if Russia has an interest in keeping the Assad regime in power, I don't know if it's possible, but an option, a possibility, maybe is Russian-Israeli understanding that Assad can stay in power if the Iranians leave Syria. That's a sort of a realpolitik deal. Assad is a terrible dictator who's butchered his people. It's not a humanitarian approach. But if it's between Assad and between crazy Islamists, I prefer if it's possible to somehow, because he's under threat, because he's going to lose power, and then Israel can weigh in a certain way. I don't think we'd send our boys to fight for him, heaven forbid, yes. But the idea is that you could have a deal where Iran is forced out of Syria. I think that's in Israel's interest.
Okay, I don't know about a deal. Again, that word is probably.
You don't like it.
Well, if the regime falls in Tehran, we don't know. There's a whole lot of factors here that are missing.
Wildcards.
But I'd just like to quote the late, great Menachem Begin, our former prime minister, who said when the Iran-Iraq war broke out in 1980, I believe it was, Menachem Begin asked about that and whose side we're on. He said, "May they both enjoy great success."
And on those very important words, I will say goodbye to you until next week.
Until next week, Mark.